Welcome back to the Wizard Shop. We're here again with the Buck Ninja, and it's IMS bearing time on this 996. Let's get started. So you're quite familiar with the RMS-IMS issue on these, aren't you? You used to have a Boxster?
Yeah, 986 Boxster, 2000 Model S.
Model S. Mm-hmm. And you ended up selling that one, didn't you? Because whatever, you didn't want to mess with it, or?
Yeah, I mean, there was other factors involved in the reason why that car, is no longer with me. But I knew that one of the things I would have to tackle at some point was going to be the IMS RMS.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's a Boxster, little different configuration than the 996 and how you get to it.
Right.
But I knew that that's something I would have to tackle.
On the Boxster, the whole powertrain would be 180 degrees turned around.
Absolutely.
So it was a little different. It's the same scenario, same process, but just a little different.
Yeah.
Let's head on back to the engine bay, or actually under the engine bay, and take a look what we got going on. So a lot of you are saying IMS, RMS. Some of you are not familiar with the Porsche 996 world. It's like, what does that even mean? RMS stands for rear main seal. This is the old one. IMS stands for intermediate shaft bearing, which is what this is. We'll take a gander here in a minute up there, and I'll show you a couple of pictures. And then while we were there, we did the clutch. We replaced the IMS bearing, which is the original Porsche part, with LN Engineering IMS bearing kit. These can be quite expensive, can't they?
Yeah, they can. I've seen some in upwards of $1,200 to $1,600, maybe even more.
Right.
For a good IMS bearing kit.
This one runs about $750 to $1,000 on this kit here. It's just a little bit less expensive. It's not as extensive as some of the other ones, but it has a ceramic bearing, the upgrade, so it doesn't have the ball bearings that fall apart. In this picture here, you can see where the bearing fails and it just destroys the inside of that. The intermediate shaft actually transmits engine power between two timing chains, one at the front of the motor, one at the rear of the motor. And when this bearing goes bad, this bearing right here, it actually can cause the timing chain to jump teeth. And in this picture, you can see the result. The valves hit the pistons and it's engine catastrophe. So we did an inspection on this vehicle, and I actually thought it was just the rear main seal leaking. It had oil coming out right there underneath where the flywheel is situated. But the rear main seal actually wasn't bad. We replaced it anyway since we're there. It was actually the IMS cover. This is the cover. Was leaking out of its seal on the side. This is the actual bearing right here. And there was actually nothing wrong with the bearing, but I have to take this off to replace it anyways. I'm not going to chance it saying, well, maybe it'll last, maybe it won't.
Right.
We got all this apart. The transmission has to come out to get to this. It's not the time to be cheap. It's the time to get it done right and have it behind you.
And especially with going through and doing the clutch, I mean, you're already there. You might as well replace the rear main seal, the IMS, and the clutch all at the same time, so you never have to get back in there again.
Right. So in this clutch here, you can see the pressure plate has little grooves in it. And the clutch disc itself was getting worn down almost to the rivets.
Wow.
You can see it was actually to the point where it could start destroying the flywheel and the pressure plate. You hear people talk about they burned up their clutch. It doesn't mean they caught it on fire. That means that they've worn it down so much that's down to metal, and this thing is spinning in here, and it'll just destroy all the surfaces there. And then it no longer will make a friction contact, and you're not going anywhere. The engine will just make a bunch of noises. So all of these items on this table is going to cost $4,000 on this vehicle. Does that sound about in line what you would understand?
Oh yeah. I mean, especially with the 911, with the way that the engine is in the rearmost portion of the car, having to work from the center of it, there's just a lot more to it. At least with the Boxster, it was just drop the transmission and everything was right there.
Right.
Once that happened.
Yeah, there's a little bit more involved on this. And keep in mind, he's getting a brand new clutch, pressure plate, the throwout bearing, rear main seal, and a new LN Engineering IMS bearing, which itself is almost $1,000.
Right.
This 25% of the whole bill is right here. Well, this is the old one, but what I'm saying is that the LN Engineering kit is 25% of the bill. So if you are concerned about your IMS bearing on your Porsche 911, which it be, or it could be a Boxster 986, 996, don't go to a shop thinking, okay, I got $600 in the bank, I'm gonna tackle this. It's not gonna happen.
No, you might just be able to hold the box that has the part in it. That's
right.
it, you know.
It's not gonna happen.
Right.
So the transmission's actually ready to go back in on this one. Let's take a look under the car, but first I wanna show you a couple of pictures of what it was like. Here's a picture where the flywheel was first removed, and you can see oil seeping out of the IMS bearing area. The rear main seal actually wasn't leaking,
Right.
but it doesn't make sense to not replace it at that
No,
point.
not at all.
Especially as the cost to get this apart is not cheap. So we got the rear main seal IMS bearing replaced. Here's a picture with the new IMS bearing in place and the new rear main seal. And now let's take a look with the clutch all assembled and everything else.
Let's do it.
Okay, so as you can see, the transmission is removed from the back of the engine. It's actually behind me on transmission jack, my handy dandy bin pack Ranger line of products. We had an old transmission jack in the shop and it failed. It was a cheap overseas made one. This is the real deal and it really does a great job. As you can see up in here, we have the new IMS bearing, which is right behind the flywheel there. It sits tucked away, just barely almost touches the flywheel, but it doesn't. And the rear main seal you've seen in the picture is around the crankshaft end, and we've got the new clutch on. Everything's torqued up and ready to be put back together. The last step that's going to be here is to put the transmission in, and everything will be golden. This is probably not something you want to tackle in your driveway, is it?
Probably not on the 911, but I was really considering it for the Boxster. You know,
Right.
again, because of how everything is, 180 degrees opposed from this, and you can more easily get to everything. Now, you've probably given this car another 80, 100,000 mile lease on life, probably more.
Right. That was the customer when he brought the car here. He wanted those things inspected, and I don't think he was even concerned so much about the cost because it's a lot cheaper than buying a new motor.
Absolutely.
When that thing fails, it's sayonara to the engine. It's over.
Right.
We got the customer called. We got him the price. He said, "That sounds amazing. That's kind of what I expected to spend. Let's go for it." And that's my favorite kind of customer there. This here, we're just holding up the engine. This is a screw type transmission jack. If I were to remove this, the engine would sink pretty heavily. It's being held in by two motor mounts in the rear of the car. That's the only thing that's holding it up right now, except for this jack. You don't want to let that just hang there. But like I was saying, it would be difficult to do this on the ground. You have to hold up the engine and remove the transmission, which means your car's going to have to be pretty high off the ground on this model, on the 911. And I could foresee someone getting squished pretty hard. It may not be worth the cost savings if you get squished.
Can I say something about this overall topic of IMS RMS?
Mm-hmm.
You know, from my standpoint, and I'm not going to reach deep into my pockets and go and buy an exotic car. It has made the 986 Boxster and the 996 Porsche relatively inexpensive, right? And if you have the wherewithal to go on ahead and replace this, you've purchased a great car inexpensively, and you've given it a new lease on life, and you can go have fun with it for years. You know, again, the IMS RMS, the fried egg headlights notwithstanding, right, and the fact that they borrowed so many, the Boxster borrowed so many parts from the 996. This has actually made this car really, really inexpensive. It's one of the few 911s that you can even purchase without having to go and remortgage the house.
Right.
If you find one and it's questionable as to whether or not the IMS RMS has been performed, that's a good negotiation point for you.
Right.
An opportunity to get the price down on the car, because you know that you're going to have, at the very least, a couple $1,000s if you attempt this on your own, to, perhaps $4,000 if you have a competent professional perform the work for you.
That's definitely going to be a question on a 986 or a 996 Porsche. If you're trying to sell one, every buyer or potential buyer that comes by to look at your vehicle is always going to bring up that topic.
Especially if they know Porsche.
You're going to get tired of hearing that acronym, IMS, 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 over and over. If you don't get this done, it really devalues the car, and it's really could make a potential buyer be like, no, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to put the money into it. Maybe they don't want to go that far, that deep into it, and they'll just look for one that's already been done.
Right.
So really the bearing in there, it shouldn't have been something that had to be replaced like it is. It wasn't designed to be something that's a normal maintenance item. It's actually kind of a design flaw.
Right, because in fact the 997s had fixed the issue.
They fixed it, yeah.
Right.
So to say when does it need to be done, one of the things I did on this vehicle is I removed the oil filter, which is right here. It's a plastic housing. Don't dump out the oil yet when you get it off. And take like a white rag or a white piece of paper and just kind of dump the oil over it into a drain. You'll see it looks like spray paint. There could even be chunks in there. Chrome chunks off of the chrome plating on the bearing, all kinds of things like that. That's when you know it's time to check the IMS bearing or something else could be going wrong. This guy's oil filter was spotless clean, and I knew it probably doesn't have trouble yet, but I did see that the oil was leaking right around in here. And I knew we at least got to pull the transmission to see what's going on. And I'm glad we did, because the IMS, the cover over the bearing, was actually leaking oil. And so we removed that, and it was definitely time to put a new bearing in, whether it needed or not.
I've encountered some of them that were making, when I was actively working in the car business, I've encountered some 911s that were making a god-awful racket.
Oh, yeah.
From the back of the car because the IMS bearing was so bad.
Right.
And
that's just a ticking time bomb right there.
Ticking time bomb, absolutely.
Any given time, it can finally give out, and then all hell breaks loose. I'll show you the bottom of the engine and show you what I meant by the timing chain setup on here. Okay, so here we have the exhaust manifold, or the header. And you can see this casting in the block, or into the head actually. This is where the timing chain resides for this cylinder head on the passenger side. But as we go across to the other side over here, you can see there's no timing chain over here. That's not the way these engines are designed, like you would typically think on a Subaru or something, where there's a timing belt that goes both heads and the front of the engine. It just has the one timing chain that goes over to this head, and then there's a shaft that runs down the middle of the engine, the intermediate shaft. Back here to you see on the block this casting here, and the timing chain goes across to the back side of the engine on this side of the head. So it's kind of like the shape of a Z as far as the transfer of power for the timing chains, like this. And that shaft has two bearings, one in the front and one in the rear. The rear one is typically the one that gives the trouble. As you can see inside the bell housing of this transmission, there's a whole bunch of friction material from the clutch disc itself. That's just from normal wear. That's not nothing that's inherently wrong. It's just normal wear and tear. All that material that was on the disc is mostly now sitting in the bottom here. So it's definitely a good time for a new clutch. We also have the new throwout bearing on here. This is a Sachs clutch kit. When you push the clutch, it brings this in and out. Just like that. And the last thing that we're doing on this car is take care of his, what would you call it, the frunk? The trunk?
Yeah, the frunk. I like that one.
He would actually pull the switch inside the car to open the frunk, and nothing would happen. You could hear the actuator, this is the old actuator, would try to unlock or unlatch the bonnet or the lid or whatever you want to call it. It just wasn't doing the job, and this is what fixed it. This is a new actuator assembly, and it's just got a little cable. You can see there's zip ties on the end of it where they tried to kind of put a band-aid on it and make it work. And I suppose it did work for a little while, but finally it failed. So we've got a brand new one in there, and it works again, so we've got that taken care of.
Pretty common issue between the 996 and 986.
Right. I imagine those parts would be swappable, weren't they?
I'd imagine they are, and again, that's part of why some of your more elitist 911 owners kind of turned their nose up at the 986 because there was too much interplay between it and the Boxster.
Right. I've read a few articles that say probably from the back of the door forward is basically a 911 on a Boxster. So that was definitely, like you said, with the Elitist, someone can buy a Boxster and almost essentially have a 911.
Pretty close.
Pretty close. So that was definitely a bad point. I don't think it's that way anymore, though.
No. Porsche's made big strides to really separate the two cars.
Yeah.
You know.
The Boxster would be not a premium level as far as what they have to offer.
No, but for somebody who's looking at his pocketbook, give me all the Boxsters.
Yeah.
All of them.
I actually used to have one. If you guys saw in some videos way back, I showed how to do a few things on the Boxster I had. I had a 986S as well, and it was black in color, just like this one. You can check that video out. I've got a lot of different things I did on that to solve some issues, like on where the fuel cap is. It can make like a humming noise. That can be an issue to go bad. There's a solenoid or a purge valve that goes bad in there. But anyways, we'll get this transmission back in. We've got the IMS bearing solved, the issue solved. We got the rear main seal replaced. We got a new clutch, a new trunk actuator. And just like Bug Ninja just mentioned, we've just added a lot of years of life to this car. So where it could have had another couple of years before that failed, now it could be 5, 6, 7 years down the road and still doing fine. So that was what the customer was after, and I'm glad we were able to take care of that for him. So thanks for following along, Bug Ninja, and letting us know some of your experience, some of the things you've seen on this as well. And we'll get this thing back on the road and get it to the customer. If you're curious what kind of tools I use in the shop, check my Amazon affiliates link in the description below. We also have a link for bin pack for any of the lifts or the transmission jack or any kind of shop equipment you might be interested in. If you haven't hit the subscribe button already, I really recommend you do that now. We have a shop full of cars and lots of video content to come. Thanks for watching.